Okay. Hello and welcome to YWCA's Facebook Live Connect, Heal, Learn speaker series. I'm Bree Liu. I'm an LPC and a lead therapist at the YWCA Greater Austin. For those of you who are unfamiliar, YWCA Greater Austin provides individual, couple, family, and group therapy, care coordination services, life skills classes, school-based services, consultation, training, and advocacy. So we do a lot. Our mission is to eliminate racism, empower women, stand up for social justice, help families, and strengthen communities, which we've been doing for over 115 years in Central Texas. In the Central Texas area. We truly stand at the intersection of mental health and social justice, and I'm so happy and grateful to be a part of this team. This speaker series focuses on inviting subject matter experts to discuss topics connected to mental wellness and social justice. And this month, we're recognizing Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month by inviting community partners to today's panel discussion. Together, we'll be highlighting the richness of diversity among the AAPI communities, experiences of living multiculturally in the U.S., the cultural strengths and joys, and the community's overall mental health and well-being. Today, we're joined by Emlyn Lee from Brave Communities, Jennifer Sia from Asian American Family Support Services of Austin, AFSA, and Sona Shah from the Parks and Recreation Department. Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
Yeah. Before we dive into the meat of our conversation today, I would like to invite you all to please introduce yourself. You can feel free to share how you self-identify, what experiences inform or impact how you identify, and a little bit about the work that you're doing. So whoever wants to jump in, you're welcome to. I know we're all like scoping it out, seeing who jump in first.
Feeling the room.
Polite.
I can go first. Hi, my name is Jen. I'm 22, used she, her pronouns, and I'm the digital outreach advocate on the community education team at AFSA, or Asian Family Support Services of Austin. A lot of words. But I run our social media and do our digital outreach, so I'm super excited to be here in community with y'all. I'm also going to give a quick visual description, just in case there's like any visually impaired folks out there. But I'm cisgender Chinese American woman. I've got medium length black hair growing out of perm. I got like last September. And today I'm wearing a red tank top with my mom's white pearl necklace. So gonna channel her wisdom and grace today. So yeah, nice to meet y'all.
That's so sweet.
I'll go next. Hi, I'm Emlyn Lee. I identify myself as Chinese American, pronouns she, her. I am a believer. I am a stepmother, a daughter, friend, sister. And I founded Brave Communities in 2016. And so we're a nonprofit here in Austin. And our mission is to cultivate brave spaces so that we can build relationships, awareness, voices, and engagement, which is the acronym for BRAVES, and so that we can amplify voices and communities of color.
Hi, thank you for having me. My name is Sona Shah. I use she, her pronouns, and I am South Asian American. Cisgender female. I don't usually include my age, but Jen, I know that you did, and I've been thinking a lot about age in a lot of this work around equity, around racial justice and things, because I think so much language has kind of changed. I'm 45, so I consider myself sort of a Gen Xer, and I work for the city of Austin Parks and Recreation Department. And the way I kind of came into the city was actually I managed the Asian American Resource Center, so one of the cultural centers within the city of Austin. And then about a year and a half ago, I got promoted into the inaugural Equity and Inclusion Program Manager for the Parks Department. So a lot of my work is at the intersections of cultural spaces and natural spaces, right? When you think about that. And I think my work in many ways, and my kind of journey has all been integrated with sort of thinking about my identity and how we show up in a very unequal society.
Yeah, thank you all for being here. I'm feeling really privileged to be in such so much wisdom in this space right now. Yeah, rich wisdom. So I'm excited for this conversation. Continuing with a bit of a lighter note, what is y'all's favorite cultural dish, food, or snack? And if you'd like, you can feel free to go a little bit in depth in describing it, because I feel like food just connects us all.
I can go first because I tend to like, and then it's funny because I'm South Asian, my family's Indian, Gujarati, and yet my favorite food isn't Indian or South Asian. I lived in China for 2 years as a Peace Corps volunteer, and specifically in Sichuan, Chongqing area. And so I really think a lot about the mala, like the, oh my gosh, the Sichuan peppers and things. And so honestly, like a lot of that stuff is my favorite food. And especially like pan-fried home-style tofu with like, you know, all of the peppers and everything, and then the sauteed snow pea leaves on the side, which is just amazing. So that's my favorite.
My mouth is watering.
I'll go next. I was gonna say, you know, like I love dumplings, right? The like steamed, boiled, fried, whatever. But then since you all shared your age, everyone, I just turned 50 this year, and my friends are always like, how you like what? You don't look 50. And I am gonna say my secret is, you know, this Asian don't raisin, because I eat so much preserved fruit. Like I love those salty prunes that are like called huameis in Chinese. Like I love them, and whenever I give it to any like non-Asian friend, they're like, what is this turd with like salt on it? And I like my college roommates would have to eat it. Like anyone that was like near me would just see me like eating these salty prunes, and people are like, what is that? And so like I love those. Like there's these dried mangoes, but the different mangoes that you get from like Trader Joe's or Costco, they're like these really salted and preserved. So I attribute that to no wrinkles of that's how so that'll be my quick little tip for food and better skin, I guess.
We're gonna come for beauty secrets.
Yeah. You just opened up a lot of memories for me. I hadn't thought of those little salted prunes in so long. My mom used to carry them in her purse and like give them to us.
Love them.
Snack.
Okay, I'm taking notes because I would love to age as beautifully, so I will keep that in mind. When I thought of snacks, I thought of the Calbee shrimp chips, because my sister and I used to like religiously eat those during the summers when we would like watch movies together. We'd like down the whole bag. But then I also thought about like the pork and chive dumplings that my dad made. We like made them every Sunday or for like special occasions. Like once I got old enough, I would start helping like fold them or like make them entirely on my own. So I think that's definitely a core memory. I love how food just like lit up all of our faces, and it's just like love it.
I could stay with this conversation just talking about food, honestly, and skincare. But to keep the conversation flowing, how do your individual identities inform the work that you're doing? And also, how do you, like, when you think of identity, what comes to mind when you think of like the identity? And yeah, whoever feels compelled to answer.
I think I kind of mentioned in like when I was introducing myself, a lot of my work has been focused around so much of identity formation. And I think the reason I was born and raised in Houston, Texas, second generation, you know, Asian American, and since I aged myself, I also was like very much where it was like a lot of whiteness around me, right? And so I think my journey has been really kind of thinking about how do I undo some of that sort of ways we assimilate, And so much of my work, I mean, has been sort of in Asian American communities. When I first started working after Peace Corps, I ended up being AmeriCorps Vista with Saheli, which is now AFSA. And when I think about all these experiences, it was really about like connecting with other Asian Americans around our racialization, right? And I'm wearing my Center for Asian American Studies shirt because I worked here for 7 years too at UT, where it was like being able to work directly with students and like advising and really building out how that kind of internalization of so much of this history, so much of this sort of identity formation and things we don't get, right? And so in my work currently, I think about this stuff a lot, especially in relation to us within other marginalized communities and other communities of color, so that it isn't just like the representation that's there, but how are we really trying to think about all people, right? Feeling a sense of belonging. And so I think that was your question. I'm not really sure what was your question, but yeah, I think that was sort of part of it. But I do think a lot of my work is centered around belonging and how do we find these kinds of communities, especially when for Asian Americans, we're still such a growing population and don't have so much visibility sometimes, or visible in like harmful ways sometimes and not. So
Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Thank you, rich answer.
I'll tag on. I'll be the middle like speaker. I'll tag on to what Sona was saying. You know, exactly what I think. I was born and raised in Silver Spring, Maryland, so right outside of DC. And even though it was, you know, pretty multicultural, as of like a first suburb outside of the city of DC, it's, you know, and growing up in the 70s, there's only but in a it was a multicultural school. You know, it hit the 20%. Like diverse student population. But then I think back in elementary school, it was all white teachers. I think the only, you know, staff of color were probably janitors, you know, and maybe the food servers. It wasn't until I think middle school when I had a choir teacher and maybe some gym teachers that were teachers of color. And so the narrative that we receive, you know, from school, from you know, definitely media, like at that time we didn't have internet and we didn't have cable, you know, it was just ABC, CBS, NBC. You only have so much, you know, brought to you and into our stories. And you know, my family was very, like, my parents were instilled the Chinese culture in us, and we went to Chinese school on the weekends, and I hated it growing up, right? Like, who does that on Saturdays when you're supposed to be watching cartoons? And then they moved it to Sundays, which is even worse, that you have to like do school like 6 days a week. So but I think, you know, that's now what I brought in, where it's like, for me, and being the youngest of 5 daughters, you know, it was like we definitely got more assimilated into the white American and Euro stories. And so it's so important now, you know, when we're talking about like whether it's school curriculum or books, and how important it is to have diverse stories. And that's a big part of why we have Brave, you know, and why we started Brave, is to really share our stories and be seen and heard, and to be included, and to include everyone's voices, and to amplify the marginalized voices so that we can change the narrative and be part of the stories. So be part of history.
Diverse, historically accurate stories too, is what comes to mind when I hear you, like actually accurate to our experience. Yeah.
Wow. I love that y'all like talked a lot about belonging. And I was like reflecting on that, and how like even when I was younger, belonging was kind of like aligning with whiteness, or like that's what it meant to belong in society, was like being accepted or like seen as successful by white people, and like trying to unlearn and relearn what belonging feels like now, and like how to show up authentically. I was watching like an old podcast wear Alok Manone. I don't know if y'all know them, but they're like a great artist and activist and poet. And they have like a quote that says like, "Are you fighting for freedom or privilege?" So I was thinking about that. And I love that y'all also touch on like interconnectedness, like with other communities. But when I think about identity, for me, it's like, what do I think about when I like walk out the door, like how I show up in the world? And for me, I think that's being an Asian American woman. And I think that ties with what we do at AFSA. In case people don't know, we work with Asian and immigrant survivors of violence and abuse. So for me, those two identities, being Asian American and woman, I think play a lot into like the safety I feel when I walk out into the world. I also think being a daughter of immigrant parents makes me reflect on like the barriers that exist when doing the work that I'm involved in, whether that's like saving face and like pride when talking about violence and opening up conversations about wanting to reach out for support or reach out for like mental health services, or also just like language access barriers. So I think those are identities I think about doing the work I do. Yeah.
Thank you. Feel as if we already touched on this a little bit. Is there anything else y'all want to add on to what it means to be Chinese American, Asian American, South Asian American, living in America, or more specifically in Austin, Texas? Or do you feel that that last question captured a lot of that?
I think, Jen, what you were saying, because I've been thinking a lot about this too, and I started a lot of my career in many ways through Saheli back then, because it was sort of the first time I was working with a lot of South Asian women that were like my mom's age, and that I had never sort of seen that kind of activism, right? And that sort of empowerment in a way. And so with the identity, I think a lot about gender too, right? In so many of these ways, and you mentioning Alok too, who I love, and the ways they kind of push the boundaries of thinking about these binaries, right? And so I think, as I don't know, the younger generation honestly gives me so much hope in thinking about how to just be and belong in spaces where you don't have to deal with a lot of that other stuff, right? And you can just kind of show up to be yourself. And I think we're still creating that, right? And so in many ways, though, the gender piece, I think a lot about, especially within Asian American identity, because I think so much of culture and things, and not to be like biased or anything, but a lot of that is sometimes held through your maternal lines, right? Sometimes. And so I just think, like, for my mother, like, I'm my grandmother in all their wildest dreams, right? Because I'm able to live my life the way I am, but yet I'm still trying to fight a good fight for other things and trying to balance those stuff.
Thich Nhat Hanh writes a lot about that concept of there's intergenerational trauma, and there's also intergenerational healing, and we can heal like 7 generations worth of dreaming and barriers. And so
what I'll add to the question of like being with our identity as a Chinese American or as an Asian American and female, especially now in 2023, in the US and in Austin, Texas, I think the thing that's changed has, there's, especially with COVID and COVID breaking out, like, news is saying that it broke out in Wuhan, China. And for me, I actually taught English in China, in Wuhan, China in 95. And so like, no one's ever heard of Wuhan. Like, I didn't even know where it was when I, got this placement. And of course it made, global news with the pandemic. And clearly we all know the increase of violence and anti-Asian hate crime increased during COVID. And then now there's still this like continual propaganda, anti-China, anti-Asia. whether it's, for political reasons or like economic power, I don't know, whatever type of superpower that ego and pride gets into every, nation's way. And I just think that's the thing that's like changed in the shift that's happening in the climate of like my personal identity, and then also being concerned of like my elder parents. I've got an 88-year-old mom and a 93-year-old father, and it's like just making sure that they're of course healthy at that age, but also now safe, because we hear so much more and the crime that's going on in the violence, and also just the news, the balloon that's the spies and everything, and TikTok, all the control. And so I think the news that we're getting, it's again that level of kind of bring on to what both of you are saying, like when Jen walks out, like we also have to carry this weight of like, I am representing, yes, Asian, and specifically knowing that I'm Chinese American. And, I even have this like closer connection to Wuhan. I'm going to try to like break every prejudice and bias out there. I don't know how to, but it's like that weight that I think many communities of color have to experience, because we just get judged by our skin color, our hair, our eyes, our nose, like our physical features, that I think a lot of our white, friends and neighbors don't understand. And so that's something that I think has shifted in the past, 3 years.
I really appreciate you saying that, because I've been thinking about that a lot in the ways, especially within work and working in institutions, and the kind of like cultural taxation that I feel as many of us, especially like leaders of color in many ways, because much of what you were saying, Emlyn, was a lot of what we discussed when I managed the Asian American Resource Center, because in many ways, like we had to shut down because of COVID. We had a large senior program, right? Many of them Chinese American. And so it's like having to kind of be an institutional worker, right? Thinking of all of these other things, but then also having to kind of be in the bureaucracy, getting certain things done and all of that. And it's a lot. Like I definitely feel the weight of a lot of this stuff. And I see it in like other colleagues of color too, that are, trying to do the work.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's super interesting because I feel like we're balancing two dynamics of like, one, we've had a long history of being like othered and like made invisible, like feeling like a foreigner, but now like with COVID, we've become like hyper visible and like a target safety wise. It was like we navigate both of those dynamics at the same time. And so that's just like something that came to mind of like we're made invisible when it's like convenient for other people, but then we're targeted when it's also convenient. So that was like something I thought about when y'all were speaking.
And I think it's so similar with 9/11, right? And so when we think about even with 9/11, what happened in the ways that South Asian American, Arab communities and others were sort of targeted, it's like you can see these things just keep happening in very similar, ways.
Yeah. It's like a different groups cast, but the same script over and over. Americanness can be taken away so easily, or we're reminded that it never really was ours.
Yeah.
Okay, Emlyn, I want to check in on time.
Yeah, I might.
At time.
Yeah.
And then I need to check with the others. Are y'all good on time, or like, because I can move to a close right now, or we can stay on and ask more.
I still have another 30 minutes.
Okay.
I'm okay with time.
I'm gonna hop off. I'm so sorry.
Is there any last thing you want to
Take
say,
care.
Emlyn, before you do hop off?
No, I so appreciate, and this is what's so important of these conversations, right? And the allyship and the sisterhood and everything of this series, of your Heal, Connect, and Learn. And so I appreciate the space and just getting to know you all. So, and I will have to connect too, because after teaching English, I worked on this riverboat ship that went up and down the Yangtze from Wuhan.
I taught English at Three Gorges College in
Yes.
Guangzhou. So yes.
Courses, yeah. And I mean, yeah, it's this whole cycle. And that's what brought me into tourism, because when I worked on that ship. So we'll have to get some mala tofu or something.
Yes.
Thank you all so much. Thanks, Bree.
And when we'll put your contact info in the post and like
Okay.
share your info and stuff. Yeah.
And take care, Emlyn. Okay.
Thank
Make
you.
sure you're
Yeah,
taking care of
so much
yourself.
for making time for us.
Absolutely. I'm sorry I just put it on half an hour. So
It's
Okay.
my bad. Okay. I like that we've already gotten like really deep into our questions and the content that I wanted to cover. But there are a few more points I want to hit. And also I wanted to say I'm like so happy that we had this group of people on this call. There's so much connection and like feeling like a sense of belongingness with all of y'all. So lucky.
That's so sweet.
I love it. I feel, again, like I've been in Austin, in and out in Austin since '96. And so just to kind of be in spaces like this brings me a lot of joy, because we didn't have this when I was younger.
And I grew up in the 90s and I still didn't have it because I grew up in Georgetown. So I also have a really white upbringing. Yeah, so these spaces, it just feels right. It just feels like settled. Yeah.
Oh, I feel extra grateful hearing that then, because I'm still young. I mean, all of y'all are still young, but getting to have these conversations even younger, that's good to reflect on.
I feel like it's really special for y'all because you can have that sense of belonging via the internet, via TikTok, in a really
Yes.
accessible way. Yeah.
That's true.
So, yeah. Okay. I did want to ask this question. I really want to touch on the fact that the Asian American experience is very diverse. We're not a monolith. And even every time I try to get people together like this, I want to be like really conscious. It's like you're not speaking for the whole community. You're speaking about your little pie, sliver of the pie experience. But over 50 different ethnic groups fall under the term AAPI. And at the same time, the term Asian American, it really has its roots in the fight for civil rights, a desire to demonstrate solidarity across ethnic communities, and a call to action and unity. For my research, it seems like the grouping of Pacific Islander with Asians and Asian Americans has its roots more in census tracking, but if y'all have different info on that or intel on that, please let me know. How do y'all personally feel about the umbrella term AAPI? And is there anything else you would like to say about social justice, solidarity, and honoring uniqueness that you haven't already touched on?
You want to go first, Jen?
Yeah,
Or do you want me to?
I might like stumble a bit because sometimes I like think while answering. I think it's cool that there are so many like nuanced relationships with the term AAPI. I think it's good to always remind people like how diverse and like vast Asia is. Like even within a country, there's so many like dialects that are spoken. So I think even like when we share this umbrella term, like it unites us. We can't forget that like our needs, our lived experiences, our struggles, our joys, like can't be lumped together. And this is something we talk about at OFSA actually, of like the importance of disaggregating data within AAPI communities. They're just, for example, there's like big gaps in like wage between different Asian communities. So this also plays into like the model minority myth of like the successful Asian, but there are Asian communities that are like really struggling in poverty. And so when you like lump us all together and don't see us for as like our individual needs, it can like really dismiss the areas that we still need support in. But I do think it's also sometimes helpful to have a label that brings communities together just as like a beginning point. But then after we come together, we like see each other and listen beyond labels. So yeah, those are my thoughts on AAPI.
Yeah, I think very similarly, like I see the term, and even when I say South Asian American, the reason why I say South Asian American is to really be inclusive of recognizing that India dominates in South Asia, and but yet the experiences that me and other folks from, like, you know, that diaspora can have similar experiences here in the United States. And so I really don't ever really say I'm Asian American, because I also, as a South Asian American, you know, when I was in college, like many of the Asian like groups didn't necessarily consider me Asian, right? And so there's a lot of marginalization that I think that happens within any sort of groups. But because, again, like I've worked in Asian American communities and specifically Pan-Asian, I do see a lot of need in the sense of being, having like a stronger base and power, right? Because again, like with our smaller populations. But I think, Jen, what you were saying, it's like being very cognizant of needing that disaggregated data and needing to understand those experiences, because yeah, like, you know, Cambodian Americans, Vietnamese Americans should not necessarily be lumped in with like well-educated Chinese and Indian Americans, right? And even within some of those subsets within South Asia too, like Nepali, Bangladeshi, all of those have like very different experiences. Around Pacific Islander, this is a very I can understand sometimes why it's included, because I think again of having more numbers within a group. But at the same time, I think Pacific Islanders do experience things very differently from Asian Americans. And I think that concept still isn't very much, again, like when I worked at the Asian American Resource Center, we talked a lot about this and like how to bring that in, right? Because the Pacific Islander population isn't super big here, right? In Austin, but yet where would they go? So like just trying to figure out those dynamics and those relationships. But one of the things that I think that I've kind of intellectually started thinking about more and more, especially when I worked at UT, was this idea of like settler colonialism. And in many ways, I think us as Asian Americans really need to think more about that in the ways that we can perpetuate inequities in our society, because we are not, I think, you know, yes, there's diversity. Yes, that's all that stuff is good. But in what ways has our ability, right, to be able to immigrate here and settle here discount Indigenous and African-American folks, right? And so I see with Pacific Islanders something very similar in the sense of this Indigenous sort of like knowledge, or just from like that space. And I don't think here in, at least in Austin, I've seen sort of more of a group kind of take that on, right? And my coworker, she's actually from Guam, and we talk a lot about this because I know for many of them, they may not necessarily see the Asian American Resource Center as a space for them, right? And so in what ways do we, you know, put it on us to kind of build and make those relationships and link them up for the resources primarily, right? So, yeah.
Touched on so much. I'm always really interested in like the intersection or like the interplay of historical trauma and how all of our histories back in our homelands, there was so much historical war there and colonization and oppression, and then that interplay that you were speaking of how at the same time then coming to America, this adds like another layer of immigration experience that can unite us, but can also be really different and it's like a very nuanced. And then settler colonialism, I've been learning a little bit more about specifically Native Hawaiians and Filipino, Chinese, Korean, Japanese people, and then the tensions that were there at the very beginning. So, and at the same time, there is it seems like some community too. So it's all really rich and like fascinating. Yeah.
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 And I think a lot of it is about like as my work now is focused more just on sort of like race equity, not specifically like Asian Americans, but I think a lot about, in the sense it's like really we just all need to figure out how to kind of talk amongst difference in these ways to kind of have that understanding and having real authentic relationships across difference. And sometimes I think about like my parents' generation and even my cousin who immigrated here in like high school, I think how sometimes they still stay within their own secluded, like sort of Jane Gujarati community, you know, and I think about their kids and what are they experiencing in that sense of, you know, this country that is really just an experiment in many ways.
Yeah, I think that's why interconnectedness is so important, because like a lot of our struggles are like rooted in the same oppression of like white supremacy, xenophobia, all of that. So when we see ourselves as like, when I fight for you, I'm really fighting for like all of us. I think that's like when real change starts to happen. Like we can all coexist and like share this space, and it doesn't have to be like a competition. We all have the space here. So yeah, I really love that.
Yeah, like unlearning or like tearing down structures that create that scarcity mentality. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I really could stay on here with y'all for forever, I feel like, but being mindful of y'all's time, I think I'm going to start to move us to a little bit of a close. I do want to ask two more real questions and then one more about your work again. What are your hopes and concerns for the Asian American community moving forward? And what do you wish people outside our communities understood?
It's such a big question.
I know.
It's very hard. I'm like, I have so many hopes and dreams. Some of my hopes are like continuing to break unhealthy intergenerational cycles of trauma. And that starts like with putting in the work and like myself, and also like having conversations like these. I also think it looks like investing in our own joy and community. We actually just had like a really wonderful trainer come to us yesterday, actually. Their name is Benji Hart. They use they, them pronouns, but they came to us for like an anti-Black, anti-immigrant training. And they talked about how right now we're at a moment where like risk is required and how that's super scary. But if we're like receiving pushback or like backlash for something we're fighting for, it's probably a sign that we're doing something meaningful. And I really love that. Yeah, doesn't that just inspire you to like want to do something? But yeah, it was really wonderful. So I'd love like our community also to start taking direct action for like our own healing and justice and like talking openly with each other. Yeah, I think that's just a little bit.
Yeah, I love that, Jen, and we'll probably ask you who the trainer was again later.
Yes, definitely.
Because I think in many ways, I also believe that in the sense of risk. And I think when I think about specifically Austin and kind of the Asian American community, one of the things that I really am trying to grapple with is this idea that in Austin, you know, Asian Americans are the fastest growing population, yet the Black population is declining. And like, we're one of the only cities in the country that is happening as far as like the Black population declining. And so I really think about like, I hope as like Asian Americans to just be more nuanced in understanding that. Like I've heard from other community members where it's like kind of taking pride in that statistic. And that really worries me sometimes, because I think as people of color, as Asian Americans, right? It's like, you know, so much of our conversation in the beginning was about assimilation to whiteness, right? And so it's like, I really hope there's more of a deep internal look at like how that plays out, because I think, you know, in many ways, white supremacy can still exist even if you have all leaders of color. And so those are some of the things that I think about in this work, and especially within my community. What was the second question that you had?
What do you wish people outside our community understood?
Oh, outside. Oh, there was
Our
this like
community.
lovely Hassan Minaj and Arani Chang. I don't know if y'all saw that clip, but it was so perfect. It was a Daily Show segment, and I just loved it because I think it helped me. Like, that was like the segment that I want every white person or anyone outside of our community to kind of understand. Is basically they're, you know, two Asian Americans, but then they have beef with one another because one's right South Asian, the other one's Chinese American, or yeah, and then they have to stop and be like, oh, wait a minute, the white people are watching, you know, and as if there's a different conversation. And sometimes there are different conversations that happen. And so how can we all kind of understand that, right? Even for me, and understanding that within different racialized groups. And so again, it's about really making those authentic connections with people. And how do we do that if we can't openly talk about these experiences and sometimes the internalized and emotional, right, just weight of it all? I don't think sometimes people really understand that, and especially when we are labeled model minority, right? Like, this is the reason why I love like Kathy Park Hong's book Minor Feelings, because I do think it so accurately expresses like the internalness of like how we kind of have to deal with so much here, but yet we, you know, are seen as somewhat successful or somewhat, right, like these things. And so
Yeah. I feel like I need to get y'all back together to do a whole another part 2 on how, like, just your answer just there about like how it is that we have authentic connections and talk about these things that we don't talk about. But for sake of today, I'm going to ask one more kind of big one. It depends if you take it as big. What is your favorite thing about your culture, being Asian American, and what are some strengths that you personally might connect back to our cultures and communities?
This is also a really hard question.
I know.
There is so much. We just have such beautiful, like rich cultures. And that's something I'm still like engaging in myself. Like one thing, like my parents didn't raise me bilingual, and that's something that is like hard for me because I think language is like a huge barrier. So like connecting with my grandparents is a lot harder. Like normally I would like ask a lot of questions, but because I can't understand or like relay it back, our connection is just like at a very surface level. And I think even growing up, a lot of the customs weren't shared too. So I'm still like trying to learn that a lot on my own and also with my parents still. But yeah, I think the culture is just so beautiful. If you go to community or like cultural events, even if you don't belong to that community, you're still so welcome if you like show up with a lot of curiosity and respect. I also think the way we take care of each other with food is one of my favorite things, like cooking for friends, cooking for my family. It's such a love language of like care and affection. And I also think our community ties, being very community oriented, is also a strength I really love. Just like showing up for people through action, but also through words now, which is something I'm trying to bring that wasn't as present in my upbringing. But yeah, Bell Hooks has like a really great quote that I like that says, rarely are we healed in isolation. Healing is an act of communion. So community
Mhm.
oriented, all of that I love. Mhm.
Yeah, I agree. I think the collectiveness, right, of and I think within America and this idea of America, there's so much individualism that, you know, the collectiveness and how we show up in our communities is so important. And that really showed with my family and my parents, you know, when they immigrated to the States. My dad came in the late 60s, my mom early 70s, but for me, one of the memories that I have growing up is my mom throwing like Navrati, like Gerbas and stuff in our backyard and all of these things because it was such a smaller South Asian community in Houston back then. And when I think about that, like that gives me so much joy. Like I still really love dancing. I love doing all those things. And then my family is Jain. It's a religion in India, and it's a pretty small religion, but like the main philosophy is nonviolence. And so it's interesting because I think when I was younger, I pushed a lot, like of not having to do those things and trying to assimilate. But the older I get, the more I'm recognizing how some of those things still really like are instilled in me, right? Like yeah, I didn't like my brother and sister, we all like work in public sector nonprofit. And we're just like, what happened to us? You know, like like we weren't the typical you know, the typical South Asian like doctor or whatever that our parents probably wanted us to be. But I think about that, and I think in many ways it was my culture that made me the way that I am. And so I think I have to tell my parents that.
Aw. So lastly, if people watch this and want to connect to y'all's programs, what do they need to do?
So I work in the City of Austin Parks and Recreation Department. I don't know if my email is up anywhere on the site because now I don't manage a facility anymore, so it's different. But it's just sona.shaw@austintexas.gov. And you know, if folks want to reach out, and especially with, again, we have cultural centers within our Parks and Recreation Department. So I think in many ways, those spaces can be spaces of healing and gathering. And so if folks want to get involved or just kind of understand more of the work we're trying to do, reach out.
Jen?
Yeah, so once again, I'm from Asian Family Support Services of Austin. You can check out our website at afssaustin.org, read all about the services that we provide, or you can follow us on socials at AFSS Austin. That's probably the easiest place to keep in touch with like events, volunteer opportunities, or just like other programming that we're doing. Also want to highlight our 24-hour hotline at 877-281-8371. It's free, confidential, and also available in all languages. So if anyone is in need of support, either you or someone you know, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. But yeah, that's probably the best way to stay connected.
Thank you so much for joining me, and especially Sona jumping on like last minute. I literally emailed her at like 3 p.m. last night. But y'all, such a wealth of wisdom, and I feel so like invigorated just being in community with y'all. So
Thanks for
any
creating
last
the space, Bree. You did it too.
Laura. But is there any last parting words that y'all would like to say about our conversation or time together?
I think for me, just you know, building those connections and those relationships is so important. And like I kind of said, just seeing the growth of AFSA, and also how many like folks I know that have gone through that sort of organization to kind of be able to because we didn't have spaces like that. And so, and now I'm seeing more and more places pop up. So it's just like, there's more opportunity to connect. And so just really trying to be careful about isolating, you know, oneself, because I think that can also make you not understand how you kind of fit into the world, right? And it's through those relationships. I think the bell hooks quote that you gave before, Jen, right? Like in many ways, yeah, that's my advice.
Yeah, I think I'm just very grateful to be also a part of this. I encourage people to like bring these conversations into their own lives, whether that's like with family or with friends, if you feel safe to do so. And also that your lived experience is like enough expertise to like talk about this. Cause like I'm like 22, I know nothing still. But I think that's enough to like show up and have really meaningful conversations like this. So yeah, I encourage you to do that with people in your life.
Well, thank y'all so much again. And echoing Jen, please keep the conversation going. If you'd like to connect for services at the YWCA, you can contact our main line, which is 512-326-1222, 32s. And you can also visit our website if you'd like to connect with Brave Communities, AFSA, or Parks and Rec, or SONA. We'll share the information in the comment section of this post. But yeah, thank you so much. Like, thank you.
Cheeks are hurting from like smiling.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna stop